Grouse hunting in winter offers many side benefits, some tangible, others not so easily measured. The forest in winter acquires a dimension of rare beauty not easily detected from the salt-spattered highways. The hunter pays his only dues by the effort of hoofing it back off the road. At first, the landscape appears bleak, a black and white montage of stark, bare limbs against the dead gleam of fallen snow. The eye soon adapts and becomes sensitive to subtle colors and reflections. Just when you are totally distracted by the beauty of a winter world, summer-like thunder erupts. Oops, there goes a grouse, flying hell-bent for cover. Your gloved fingers grope clumsily for the gun's safety and trigger. You swing, shoot, and well, probably miss. That's one thing about grouse hunting that doesn't change with the seasons. Those birds are always hard to hit. Nevertheless, winter grouse hunting carries with it certain measures of predictability that the autumn season lacks. For one thing, winter grouse can be found more easily and in less time afield. This is because the altered habitat provides not necessarily less food and shelter, but a lesser variety of both. If you know where to look, the odds are good that grouse will be found there. We'll talk about that later. Another aspect of winter hunting that favors the hunter is the absence of leaves on the trees, which provides better visibility for shots at longer ranges. And with the onset of colder weather, there usually are fewer hunters afield. The only real disadvantage of winter hunting is that the whole scenario is a bit less comfortable if you're not prepared for the cold weather. But if you're willing to abide the lack of autumnal pleasures, such as eating wild apples and all that stuff, and replace them instead with the simple joys of physical endeavor, you will discover that winter grouse hunting is a sport that distills the principle of fair chase to its purest form. You are the hunter, and ruffed grouse is the hunted. Tracks left in the snow will testify to who won in terms of hit or miss. But in terms of opportunities given, the winter grouse hunter is always the winner. Ruffed grouse often display a winter trait that betrays some of their other tricks for eluding hunters. Although it seems hardly possible that a game bird would bury itself in deep snow to hide from the elements and predators alike, that is exactly what grouse do if conditions are right. Snow roosting has been well documented by game biologists, and any hunter who ventures into the deep, fresh snow of a winter covert in the northern states will likely make a similar observation. The discovery of a snow-roosted grouse is always a surprise. You just don't expect the snow to erupt in a wild explosion of winged thunder. The experience can definitely make you swallow your gum. But if you're planning to hunt winter grouse, you had better consider looking for snow-roosted grouse as part of the game plan. There are mixed opinions as to how grouse manage to get under the snow in the first place. The traditional belief is that they plunge headlong into the snow, like comets falling out of the sky. Obviously, if the snow isn't sufficiently deep to cushion the impact, grouse can be injured in such dramatic exploits. But there is considerable evidence that grouse do, in fact, take the plunge, particularly when being pursued by a hawk. A different school of thought holds that grouse first land gently on the surface of the snow and then wriggle and shuffle themselves down under cover. Both techniques have been reported by wildlife biologists, and I myself have read the telltale signs in the snow that substantiate both theories. Most often, however, my observations afield have been that grouse stroll through the woodlands for considerable distances before burrowing head-first into the snow. Even with this evidence of tracks and obvious entry, you can never be sure just where a grouse is lurking, because snow-roosting grouse often tunnel under the snow for distances of a dozen feet or more. Sometimes it's only a yard or less. If drifting snow has swept away all signs of entry, the stage is set for an even greater surprise when Old Rough explodes out of his frozen lair. This sudden unlocking of the earth, of scattered ice crystals forming in mid-air into a feathered fury of living motion, is the stuff of which myths are made. For the hunter, this experience is enough to instill belief in the legend of the phoenix, that mysterious bird which rose from ashes of fire to live again. You don't get to see such miracles by staying home on a cold day when you could be hunting. Grouse do most of their snow roosting from dusk to dawn, sheltering themselves from winter winds and predators during the sunless hours. However, a sharp drop in temperature or a stiff wind will drive grouse into the white stuff at any time of day. There is evidence, based on the size of the pile of droppings that grouse invariably leave behind in their snow roosts, that grouse sometimes remain underground for 2 or 3 days at a stretch. I have stumbled upon snow-roosting grouse many times when the sun was already high in the sky. Grouse lurk there beneath the surface, protected also by a keen sense of hearing. The lightest of threatening footfalls can trigger a rapid escape. According to Dr. Gordon Gullion, eminent ruffed grouse researcher at the University of Minnesota, the only raptor which poses any real danger to snow-roosted grouse is the great grey owl of the northern coniferous forests. Another researcher, Steve Loch, has reasoned that these large night birds are able to hear grouse in their snow roosts. The lynx, prowling on outsized padded feet, also is known to be adept at taking grouse from under the snow. My own close encounters show that a hunter too can approach within virtual grabbing distance of a snow-roosting grouse. There have been many times when I could have swatted grouse out of the air with a tennis racket or caught them in a fishing net had I been so equipped and so inclined to do such silly things. A major goal I set for myself during the winter I began writing this book was to capture a grouse on film as it exploded into flight. My obsession was to take a photograph that would dramatically portray the icy violence of a winter flush, complete with snow spraying every which way and with the grouse's wings spread wide, stabbing at the air for even greater speed. All I ever got was snow on my face and pictures of blurs that only I knew were grouse. I felt that my dedication, my temporary willingness to leave the gun at home, would be rewarded somehow by the high-speed photo of a lifetime spent outdoors. But that didn't happen. My only reward was that I learned how to approach a snow-roosted grouse close enough to make a close-up photo physically possible. I discovered that by lowering my feet very slowly into the snow on each step, and by not letting my shadow cross the grouse's suspected lair, I was able to shove the camera lens to within a yard of the grouse when it first appeared. Unfortunately, my reactions were never quite fast enough at that range to release the shutter in time. One day I put 5 grouse into the air out of one small snowdrift. If I'd been toting a shotgun, I might have scored both a double and a triple in the space of a few seconds. This, of course, would have been a difficult feat with the double-barreled shotgun I usually carry. 2 shots are all I get, period. Another thing I learned about grouse is that they rarely snow roost in the same area from one day to the next. I had expected my close scrutiny to reveal that the grouse followed a pattern, but instead they were unpredictable. I discovered an area where several grouse had once roosted in the middle of an open pasture, at least 100 yards from the nearest trees. Eventually, I gave up on my photography project and returned to the role of hunter. I gained from the experience, and I will be a better winter grouse hunter because of it. That's the whole point of this dissertation on snow roosting. We tend to expect ruffed grouse to behave like ordinary birds simply because they have feathers. On the contrary, grouse act more like rabbits and other land-based creatures. To successfully hunt grouse, we need to think of grouse as the gallinaceous, ground-scratching, terrestrial game birds that they are. It just will not suffice to hunt looking up, when grouse are most likely underfoot. This basic truth brings us to the buckbrush secret, something I've never read about elsewhere, but have discovered time and time again while hunting winter grouse in snow-covered habitat. Simply stated, the buckbrush secret amounts to one fact. Winter grouse often lurk under the bowed stalks of berry bushes, dogwood, viburnum, and any other kind of growth that bends over when laden with snow. Yeah, sure, you say, grouse hide under bushes in autumn too, so what's the big deal? The important difference is that winter grouse don't just hide under these bushes, they stay there. Relatively large snow caves are formed under the overhanging branches of buckbrush, and the protection from bitter weather and flying predators is much the same as with snow roosting, except that there's a lot more space for moving about and maybe even pecking at a dried berry or two. Snow roosting is virtually impossible for grouse when the snow has crusted over as the result of warming temperatures. It's my observation that grouse choose the buckbrush maneuver as a viable alternative under these circumstances. Not all the time, of course. You could go hungry betting on what a grouse will do. Whenever I find a grouse under the buckbrush, I usually flush 2 or 3 more birds during the ensuing minutes of floundering around in this always heavy cover. Don't ask me how a group of grouse are able to agree on a common course of behavior. Just be aware that, in winter, the ruffed grouse is a more social bird. Perhaps it's because the harsh conditions of an altered habitat narrow the options for the ruffed grouse. I know of several buckbrush areas within the 2 dozen or so coverts that I annually haunt, and it's to these select spots that I go first during the winter. I kick the snow-covered brush, clamber through it, and poke and probe for possible thunder. You've got to be really close to buckbrush grouse to get them moving. If this turns out to be a futile exercise, I switch my attention to possible snow roosting sites where the snow is soft and fluffy. Then I seek small clearings and the forest's edge where blowing winds have drifted the snow to greater depths. Finally, if I have not yet found where the grouse are congregated, I head for the pines, the hemlocks, the spruce, the coniferous cover where the cold bite of winter is partially muzzled. Hunting the snow-laden evergreens for grouse is a unique aspect of our sport, which, in terms of sheer thrill and excitement, is surpassed only by the once-in-a-lifetime experience of tracking a Cape buffalo or wounded lion into the long grass. Ruffed grouse routinely use the element of surprise at any time of the season to avoid being in the center of a shot pattern, and they're good at it. But back in the shadows of dense stands of pine, spruce, or hemlock, where grouse lurk during the midday hours of winter, their explosive off-your-shoulder flushes are more apt to strike terror than mere surprise in the hearts of their pursuers. The habitat I'm describing often takes the form of small pine plantations that are between 10 and 20 years old, thick but not impenetrable. Wherever you find poplar and wild cherry trees banked alongside such conifer stands in the outlands, grouse action is a distinct possibility. Similar habitat often borders more mature forest and lowland marshes. Grouse are loath to depart this type of balanced cover, and they usually fly only short distances from it, most often to another conifer from which they can keep an eye on your progress. Once flushed and newly concealed, ruff is twice as hard to flush again. You have to stalk carefully and very slowly. Walk too fast, and the hidden bird will let you pass right on by. If you goof up your second chance at a shot, you can darn near get within arm's length of a grouse before he will take off again. Even at this close range, Old Ruff has a fantastic ability to remain hidden. He will fold his feathers tight against the skin, making himself as thin as a hungry weasel. Then he will creep right down next to the trunk of the tree, usually opposite the side of your initial approach. In order to flush, he has to shuffle outward along the limb to get takeoff room. Often, just as the grouse spreads his wings, he will utter a soft alarm, cuck cuck, and then blast off in a cloud of powdered snow. But most of the time, the grouse will stay put. One way to get him to move a little and reveal his position is for you to stand absolutely still, listening intently. The grouse may get nervous and move along the perch to get a better look at you. A bird dog is virtually useless on treed grouse except to locate fallen game. When a grouse finally explodes into a branch-busting flush, your inclination will be to whip off a snapshot, especially if the bird scared you silly by knocking snow right down the back of your neck. Don't take that first shot at close range. Try to track the bird's flight and take him at an opening in the trees. If you don't get that opportunity, listen for the sound of the grouse as he plunges through pine branches to a new roost. That's something you can rarely do in autumn. Deep winter grouse don't travel far, so hold your fire if you can't get an honest shot. You'll probably get another chance. This kind of hunting can really tax your ability as a wing shot. This is where a season's percentage can drop many points in a single afternoon. You often get two separate glimpses of the bird in flight, first at ultra-close range, then an instant later at 30 or 40 yards, when the grouse momentarily clears the tops of the conifers. The choice of choke and shot size under these conditions should be based on which of these two extremes best suits your individual shooting style. Believe it or not, there's a lot to be said for taking the longer shot with a tight choke and coarse shot, even number 9 secongal. This combination is particularly effective when a heavy snowfall has decorated the evergreens with a layer of insulating snow. Snow is a real shot stopper, especially if the white stuff has been exposed for a couple of hours to sunlight and rising temperatures. Light shot just doesn't get through a packing snow. Even soft powder snow will bust your pattern wide open, and on days when the evergreens are snow-covered, the see-through ability is poor. At long ranges, the skeet bore gunner is handicapped. When two hunters work parallel along the edge of plantation pine, however, the shooting distances can be shortened. One man does the work, shoving his way through the trees about 10 or 15 yards in from the edge. The other hunter lags quietly behind, out in the open. Grouse perched in these fringe trees will invariably pop out in the open in front of the second man. At least half of the time, a tricky grouse will try to fly behind the hunter that flushed him, thereby providing a crossing overhead shot to the gunner in the open. In this situation, an open-board shotgun is no drawback. If you find one grouse in the conifers, there's almost always another one lurking nearby. I've never had a chance at a double, though, back in the evergreens. The birds flush one at a time, and you never know when you've finally got the last one airborne. Don't relax for a second. The only way to take a breather is to get the heck out in the open. It gives you a chance to pick the snow out of your ears. No one in his right mind would knock the traditional pleasures of those first Indian summer weeks of grouse season. There's nothing else quite like it, and I enjoy the company of a good bird dog as much as the next guy. But for my money, no other technique of grouse hunting comes close to providing the excitement of stalking a wary grouse, a grouse that has flushed once and will do so again at any second, with a roar of chestnut-brown wings beating up through white frosted branches. Republished with permission from Winter Grouse Hunting by Dennis Walrod, 2015. The Upland Almanac, Winter 2015. 2015 by Dennis Walrod.